Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon on DeliverPoint. So first of all, I just want to welcome everybody to the call and set out what we're going to be going through today as well. So first of all, just a quick intro to Lightning Tools for those of you who have not been on one of our webinars before. And once we've done that, we're going to just introduce the topics for today's webinar and get into lots of live demonstrations of the existing DeliverPoint and also some of the new features as well. So yeah, for the quick introduction, so Lightning Tools is a company based here in the UK. We are in our 16th or 17th year thereabouts of building different products for Microsoft SharePoint, and that's our specialization. We create tools that really enhance the abilities of Microsoft SharePoint and of course now Microsoft Teams as well, and also make things easier to manage. So that includes, of course, the permissions management that we're going to be looking at today. We cut down a large amount of time when it comes to reporting and managing permissions throughout your SharePoint and Teams environments. But we also have a number of other products as well that cover things like content aggregation, discussion boards. We also have some data integration and list form design tools as well. So you'll be able to, of course, find all of those on our website under lightningtools.com. We list them all under the products menu, and you'll be able to go through and do a quick guided tour or watch some videos on those products as well as book demonstrations and download trials, etc. Yeah, we're going to get started on DeliverPoint. So if you haven't experienced DeliverPoint before, basically DeliverPoint is a permissions reporting and permissions management tool for Microsoft SharePoint, and it was created way back at the start of Lightning Tools. So originally for SharePoint 2007, it's evolved through all of the different iterations of SharePoint on premises to SharePoint 2019, and of course we've been covering SharePoint Online and Microsoft Teams, and also OneDrive with DeliverPoint as well. So you can use the product both contextually from a sort of centralized permissions management perspective, and also a decentralized permissions management perspective as well. So in other words, if you're a site owner or a SharePoint site collection administrator, you can report and manage permissions from within sites and from within lists and libraries that you would have full control to. And of course, we're going to be covering a lot of that through our demonstration today too. We'll also take a look at reporting and managing permissions centrally. So if you're taking on the role of a IT department, maybe a data protection officer or something along those lines, you can also use DeliverPoint centrally to govern permissions and report on permissions in bulk or manage permissions in bulk as well. And we're also going to be getting into a demonstration of the new features of this version. So that's 4.2 that we're releasing by middle of next week, I would say. And within that release, you're going to see the inclusion of sensitivity labels. We're also going to be demonstrating some improvements to the way that sharing links are reported and how you can modify sharing links as well, and some other minor refinements as well, things like document icons in some of those SharePoint reports as well. And of course, you may pick up on some of these as I go through the demonstration of what we already have released today. At the end of the webinar is going to be a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. You can post them in the Q&A panel or in the chat, and I'll make sure that I read those out and answer any questions that you have. All right, so I'm going to kill my video for now, and we'll jump into some of the content for today. So what I want to talk about first of all is what DeliverPoint provides you with. So as I mentioned, it's a centralized or decentralized permissions reporting, permissions management tool. So if you happen to be a SharePoint site owner or a site collection administrator or have full control to some sites, maybe you're not IT, maybe you're a business department leader or project leader or something along those lines, of course, you have the responsibility inside your organization to make sure that the right people have the correct permissions and rights to the content that you're sharing. And this may also form part of any information management security policies that you have in place inside your organization as well, where a lot of that emphasis is on the business user to make sure that the right people have the right access to the content and that it's being shared in the appropriate way. So as that site owner, you can use DeliverPoint to report and manage permissions contextually within inside the site. So you can pull up a discover permissions report at the site level. You can also take a look at things like sharing link reports inside that site that spans the entire site. But you can also go deeper than that existing site as well. You can get into the lists and the libraries and the folders, subfolders, items, etc. That also reside inside that site. So you're covering a wide area inside a single report. And if you know SharePoint out of the box, that's already a huge advantage, because in SharePoint, you have to report and manage permissions on an object by object basis. Okay, so we'll have a look at how we can produce those reports, and we'll also take a look at how you can use some of the different operations as well, such as copy, transfer, and delete permissions. So these are really useful if you're making changes to personnel inside a department or inside an organization. If people are maybe changing roles, for example, you could transfer permissions from one user to another, and you don't have to work out perhaps what they used to have permissions to, where you need to remove the permissions and who you need to copy those permissions to. So you can basically perform that as a single action, which we'll be getting into. There's also, from a more centralized perspective, things like dead account reporting, external user reporting, and user-centric reports as well. So those are useful when you're spanning larger environments, things like going across site collections, maybe trying to check with inside site collections if there are any dead accounts or external users, and what specific users may have access to within inside those site collections as well. So we'll be getting into some of those. So first demo, what we're going to do is just have a quick tour of DeliverPoint from the perspective of an end user. So an end user with full control, so somebody that is not in the IT department, and we'll have a look at how they can use DeliverPoint to effectively report and manage permissions within some sites and teams that you may be the owner of. So let's pull up SharePoint, which hopefully you should see, and in here, we're going to get into some of those reports so that you can see the contrast. First of all, what we'll do is actually have a look at the out of the box permission reporting at site level and also file and folder level as well. So if I run the side panel here for the permissions as a site owner, it starts off pretty vague. We get the 3 SharePoint groups that you get with every single site, so we can see the visitors, the members, and the owners of this site. And some people you may see as being a direct member of some of those SharePoint groups. So if somebody was granted permissions by literally making them a member of a SharePoint group, they're going to appear inside that member group, and you will see them. You'll also see the people card and so on appear inside that group. What you don't see as a business user is the members of Active Directory security groups. So notice there is a sales group here that is an Active Directory security group, and we can't click on that. We can't do anything with it. We can, if we're looking at a Microsoft 365 group, which is what you see above sales. So when we hover over that, we see the people card, and then we get to see the members of that Microsoft 365 group. And you can click onto more members and so on and see them in this fashion. Okay, so that's how we can use that side panel to get at the permissions. But there's some things that weren't included in there, and what I'm going to do is actually just show you how we can drill down a bit further using the classic view inside that SharePoint site. So what the side panel didn't show you, but the classic view is showing you, is the fact that there is some people with direct permissions. So in fact, demo user 4 here has a direct permission of design, and then we also have demo user 5 and demo user 6 with full control, and that just didn't show up inside that side panel at all. It focused purely on these 3 groups and the members of those groups. If people do have direct permissions, if you're not using DeliverPoint, it's worth coming in and taking a look at the classic permissions page, and maybe also using the check permissions option as well. But let's have a look at how DeliverPoint would help you even further than that. So what we're going to do here as the site owner, if you do access the site as an owner, what you'll notice is there is a Discover Permissions report that appears inside the shortcut for DeliverPoint in the top right-hand corner. So we can hit that Discover Permissions report and literally see everybody that is given permissions to this site. Now you're going to see people in here that you didn't just see inside the standard way of reporting using SharePoint. We can see Julio and Abina, for example, inside this list, plus a few of the demo user accounts. So a lot of these will have different permissions and are assigned their permissions in different ways. And as I go through the pagination, you'll notice that two of the users here we picked out from the advanced permissions report, the classic mode, and that was demo user 4 and demo user 6. We can see that they have full control and design, and that was given directly to those users, so without any groups at all. We also see some people that have web only limited access. That's because they've been granted permissions to something inside the site that is not the site, and therefore they get limited access to that content, so they can navigate through the site to get to that content, basically. And then you're also going to see some users that have been granted permissions through some of the different groups. So here's demo user 8. As we expand demo user 8's group membership, we can see that that user is inside a Microsoft 365 group, and that Microsoft 365 group is nested inside of the SharePoint group. So we get to see that information. And if we just pick on another couple of users, in fact, I'm just going to filter out. Let's filter on the permission level so I can see more clearly what I'm doing. So in here, we've got demo user 4, and demo user 4 is in fact not just inside an Active Directory security group, but a nested Active Directory security group. So we had no idea that accounts payable was even permissioned at all on this SharePoint site, yet DeliverPoint is picking that up because that group was nested inside the sales group. And remember, we couldn't see the members of that sales group. So we really are getting the full picture here of everybody that is permissioned on the site. And by the fact that we're displaying the usernames, that's far more intuitive for a business user to be able to report, because they're not necessarily going to recognize the Active Directory security groups that we have, but they will recognize people, and they'll be able to tell whether these people are the right people that can have access to this site. Okay, so there is that report that we can run, the Discover Permissions. Let's just clear the filter again. And you can display this report in a couple of different ways. We can render by groups, or we can render by person. If we're rendering by group, we can see all of the groups that are permissioned before we see the people that are permissioned, unless they're direct permissions. And then we can start to drill down that way. So notice that we've got this entry here, which is a SharePoint group. We can see demo user 7 is a direct member of that group. And then we've got the Lightning Tools sales members Microsoft 365 group. And again, I can drill into that one to see who's inside that group. And we can also see that sales was in there as well, so we could expand that. Accounts payable is that nested AD security group, so we can expand that. So either way, we get a full picture as to how people are permissioned and what permission level they have at this site level. And again, we can sort and filter on this to get the information that we need from our report. So that's running that permission report at the site level on the site only. If we go into the document library here that's within inside this site, you'll notice that I can also pull up the permission reports either at the library level from the command bar, or we can also get to it from the shortcut menu as well. Let me just reload that because I don't think that quite finished loading. There we go. So yeah, DeliverPoint is here on the command bar, and if we go through and select a few of these different folders, notice that the manage access that you see when you've got a single folder selected or a single file selected isn't displaying, because SharePoint again can only report or manage permissions on a file or folder at a time. But with DeliverPoint, we can still discover those permissions or check the sharing links and so on those folders that I selected. So here we're spanning 3 different folders. We can go through and report on those and maybe filter by person. So if I wanted to, for example, filter by Sandy, we could do that and see what permissions Sandy has to those 3 folders that I had selected. And what you'll also see in this report is the fact that one of these folders, the font is transparent or dimmed, and that's because that folder is inheriting permissions, and that's a good indication to me that I can't make changes to those permissions without yet breaking the permissions first. Which we could do from here. If we have the rights to do so, we could simply come in and break the permission inheritance on that folder, and then we'll be able to make changes to that as well. Okay, so that's just a quick tour of the Discover permissions that we can run contextually within inside a SharePoint site. Let's go in and take a look at a few of the other reports that we can run contextually. And one of those is actually a sharing links report. So by running the sharing links report, we're spanning the site, and what we can see is any lists or any libraries that have a sharing link, as well as any files or folders that have a sharing link as well. And in here we can see, of course, the title of the file or folder. We've got the date and time of which it was shared, who actually did the sharing. So we've got the people card on that, so we can get in contact with them if we need to, and we can see the type of sharing, so whether it was the specific people, anybody with the link, or people inside the organization, etc. The permission level assigned, and then if it's specific people or people inside the organization, we'll also be able to drill in to see who that link was shared with. So we can see this one document here called Lorem Ipsum. It's shared with specific people, giving them contribute permissions, and we can see that demo user 6 has permissions to it, as does Brett Lonsdale. And you may pick up on the fact that Brett Lonsdale is in italics, and that is because that Brett Lonsdale is an external user. And if we hover over that and show the people card, what you'll notice in here was this sharing link was actually granted to this Gmail account here, which wasn't a Microsoft account. So when that happens, when we share something with a non-Microsoft account, such as corporate email, then that owner of that email may actually click through and sign in with their Microsoft account, which means it's sometimes difficult to actually recognize some of the people that do have access to some sharing links if they're not signing in with the contact that we shared with. So in this case, I can actually see that whilst this was shared with Gmail, it was a Microsoft account that came in and accepted that invitation. Okay, so that's the sharing links report. We can remove sharing links in here, and if you're eagle-eyed and you're already familiar with DeliverPoint, you may spot that there's also a change settings button. We're going to get into that a little bit later on because that's one of the new features that we're going to be taking a look at. All right, so that is the sharing links report. What we'll also look at here is a permissions summary. So the permissions summary is a great report to run if you've maybe not looked at the permissions for a particular site for a while and you just want to sort of get a heads up as to what's going on in terms of sharing and direct permissions, etc. What we can do is just simply produce this sharing links report, and it will provide me with some high-level information such as how many subsites there are with unique permissions, how many lists with unique permissions, likewise for items, and also how many sharing links as well. And each of these we can drill into further. So where I see there's 13 items, for example, with broken permission inheritance, we can click onto that link to see what those items are. And from here, we can get into reporting on those permissions. So if anything jumps out at me with a bit of a concern as to why that might have unique permissions, we can go through and select it. We could also maybe select something else as well. So the site, for example, and I could then produce a Discover permissions report, and we can start to see who's permissioned on the site, who's permissioned on the items that I selected as well. Now, in most organizations, this is going to be too much information to absorb because there's going to be a lot of users in there. So what you might do is jump back to that unique objects report, and you can come in here and compare the permissions, and that will really point out what differences there are between the site and between the file that we selected. So in here, we can just simply see that it's only a sharing link. That's the only difference. So we're okay with that. We can just move on. But of course, if it was drastically different, we may start to question it, remove some users and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's the permission summary report that we can also run at that site level. So the other part that we're going to get into is looking at some more of the advanced permissions that you can run. And to get to those, you pull up the main DeliverPoint page, and you'll notice that the scope for this dialogue for the reports and so on is still set to Lightning Tools Sales, which is the site that I was on when I accessed DeliverPoint. So whenever I produce a report or schedule a report, it's going to default to the scope of this current site. So one of the reports that I'm going to show you next is actually an advanced version of the Discover permissions, and we can do the same thing with the sharing links as well. We can produce an advanced version of that. And where this is useful is actually to get into some of the child objects of this site, so we can start to see things like subsites. We can see lists and libraries within inside the site as well. We can also see folders and items inside the site. We can display the folder structure if we want to, and there's a surprise here as well for new features, the sensitivity labels. We'll get into that shortly. So I'm just going to select these options here, and notice that we can also pre-filter the report as well. So if there was something specific that I was looking for, we could choose a certain permission level, for example, or any of these items in here we can also filter on. And I'm going to filter on this one here, the permission via name. What I want to do is actually say not equal to everyone, because in this case I know that everyone has read access. Everybody in my organization has read access to this site, and I don't want that to be confusing to read. I want a shorter report, so I'm just going to exclude that. We'll generate the report, and now we'll see people that have sort of read permissions, edit permissions, and so on, that wasn't granted via the everyone group. So a bit more of a useful report. But notice that we're seeing the site permissions, and as we scroll down, we're seeing list permissions, we're seeing item permissions, and so on as well. And we can, check everything that has unique permissions inside this site and know who has permissions to that content. Now, as with every single report in DeliverPoint, we could export this. So if I wanted to take a copy of that as a snapshot into Excel, we could do so. We can also save it as a template. So saving it as a template makes it easier for me to come back to. So I could actually call this my sales permissions report and save that. So even if I close DeliverPoint, we can just simply jump back into it again, not worry about setting anything. We just simply come into the report templates, and there's my sales permissions report, and I can generate it and see the same report that we just produced a moment ago. So it's still dynamic. It wasn't a snapshot. It's going to perhaps have fresh information every single time we run it, but it's now an on-demand saved template that I can use to produce that. Okay, so that's some of the things that we can do contextually. Let's just take a look at some of the more centralized ways of managing permissions as well. So rather than having the role of the business user, we may actually have now the role of a data protection officer, a security auditor, or IT manager, where you're really trying to make sure that your organization is following those best practices when it comes to reporting and managing permissions. So we'll jump back into DeliverPoint. And what we're going to do is access DeliverPoint from the shortcut menu again. You can access it that way, or another option is you can actually create a page. So if I was to add a page anywhere inside my SharePoint environment, we can add DeliverPoint as a web part onto that page, and then we have a fixed URL that we can always go to that will load DeliverPoint. And notice how that defaults to having the tree view open as well. So it's going to give us the same functionality as it would if I was to just simply access DeliverPoint via the sorry, make a head straight via the main DeliverPoint page. So let's just publish that. It's going to give that a little name here. There we go. And now we're back to our site. Good. So let's go through this way. I'm going to access DeliverPoint. We can make that full screen if we want to. And again, remember that the scope is set to Lightning Tools Sales, but inside the DeliverPoint dialog, what we can do is actually change the scope. So notice on the tree view, anything that I select is going to modify the scope of my reports. So if I was to choose the current site collection, which is always at the top and in bold, we can select that, and now this is changed to the site collection URL. Equally, I could drill into the site collection. Let's deselect the site collection. I could choose things like Lightning Tools Sales and Regions, have those both highlighted. So now I'm reporting on more than one site at a time. I could even span site collections if I want to, and cherry pick different sites that I want to report on. So that's changing the scope. That will change the scope for any reports that we produce from the reports menu, and also any actions that we perform as well from the actions menu. So they'll run with that scope in mind. So the reason why I chose those two sites was because those two have unique permissions as well. So obviously Lightning Tools Sales has unique permissions. It's at the very top of my site collection, therefore it's going to. But Regions is actually a SharePoint subsite, and that has broken permission inheritance. I can tell because it's got a full color icon. Partners, I can tell in inherits permissions because it's got a dimmed icon. And likewise with the lists and the libraries, I can tell just by looking that expense report and documents, they both have unique permissions. So we can be selecting these and producing a report on those selected objects. So now we've got all of those included in our report, and we can begin to sort and filter this report to, again, get that information that we want. Or once again, we could compare the permissions, which is what we did earlier. So we can see the differences between those different objects and maybe decide to re-inherit some of the permissions if need be. Okay, so let's take a look at the sort of changes that we might want to make. And I'm just going to run this on the top level site of this site collection. So let's produce a Discover Permissions report. And we're just going to navigate back to that last page where we saw that some of these users have direct permissions, and that's certainly not something that I want to see inside my organization. So what we could do is go through and select one of those, and we could decide that we're going to delete those permissions, for example. So coming down to account management, we can choose delete permissions, and notice that demo user 6 is still selected. And now we have some choices. I can choose whether we want to just affect this site or whether we want to affect any child site. So obviously demo user 6 may have explicitly been given permissions to regions as well, in which case by checking that box, we're going to cover off the regions site. With lists, folders and items, that was checked by default. We can leave that checked so that if there's, again, any broken permission inheritance on any folders or files where demo user 6 has permissions, those could also be removed. We can support a rollback as a safety net. So this would allow me to reverse the job just in case it all goes horribly wrong. And then we've also got the SharePoint groups that we could affect as well. Now, if I just jump back for a moment, we can see that demo user 6 has full control directly. But if I was to actually filter on demo user 6 here, and hit save, we can see that demo user 6 also has edit permissions and read permissions. And if we expand those, we can see that this is actually through some either SharePoint groups or Active Directory groups. So we've got the everyone group giving demo user 6 read permissions, and then we've got the Lightning Tools sales members, which is a Microsoft 365 group where they've got edit permissions. Okay, so there's that as a concern. So when we go to delete the permissions, what we could do to remove just the direct permissions is we could deselect the SharePoint groups and the Modify 365 groups. So I'm just going to do that to begin with, and let's just hit run. So it started the delete permissions operation, and it's performed a number of different deletions. So if we were to jump back here to the discover permissions and let's refresh that report, what you'll see is that the direct permission has gone, but the permissions where demo user 6 was granted those permissions through SharePoint groups remains. So what I could then do if I wanted to remove those is we could check these boxes as well. So I could modify SharePoint groups. We could also modify 365 groups as well. That will not include standard Active Directory security groups deliberately. Okay, so as we rerun this operation, let's jump back to that Discover Permissions report again, and we'll refresh. And notice the only one remaining now is that read permissions because the user is inside the everyone group. And of course, it would be bad practice to remove that user from the everyone group. Okay, so that's the only remaining permission. And if we want to get rid of this one, well, we go and speak to the Active Directory administrator. Okay, so that's performing a delete permissions. We've also got the ability to run other types of changes. So perhaps we also want to run transfer permissions. So let's just rerun a discover here. And to make this one obvious, I'm going to pick on demo user 4, who has design permissions. And let's just say that demo user 4 is going to be changing roles. So maybe they're moving to a different department and somebody's going to replace them. Rather than trying to figure out all of the different files and folders subfolders that demo user 4 had permissions to, what I can do is just simply say transfer the permissions from demo user 4, and we'll pick on demo user 6 again. And in here, we'll process the subsites, the lists, the folders, and the items. Again, we'll have the safety net of the rollback, and we'll modify Microsoft 365 groups as well this time. So when we hit run, this is going to go through, and any permissions that demo user 4 has will be removed from demo user 4, and they will be given to demo user 6 instead. So that's just saved me a considerable amount of time trying to figure out where demo user 4 was permissioned. So again, if we just jump back here to that Discover Permissions report, let's refresh it. And you can see that, yeah, demo user 4 has now been replaced with demo user 6. They've got that design permissions that demo user 4 did have. Now, if I made a mistake, I can get into that jobs list. So in here, we've got the operations that I just performed, that transfer between 4 and 6. So let's roll that back now. And you can see that's reversing the job. And once again, if we were to refresh this report, we can see that this is now back to demo user 4. So nothing's been harmed, and we've reversed that operation. Okay, so that's making some of the changes, and those changes include the ability to copy, transfer, delete, grant, or also revoke permissions. Revoke, I normally get a question, what is that? So revoke is where we could take away maybe certain permissions, but not all permissions. So unlike if somebody was to leave the organization, we may just spot that they had full control and they didn't need it. We just want to revoke the full control, but leave the edit permissions intact. So that's one of the things that we can do from there. Now, each of these reports we can also schedule. So if you're not seeing that schedule menu in your environment, that's because there's a bit of work to do to get that set up. There's some Azure work, and we've got all of that documented, and we can help you through tech support on how to accomplish it. But notice in here that we can actually go through and schedule a Discover Permissions report or Sharing Links report, and also a Unique Permissions report that we've not looked at yet. So if we were to schedule a Discover Permissions, what we're basically doing is the same as what we did in the Advanced Permissions report. So we can set the same options, but we get to this time specify a folder URL to a document library where we want this to be created. So we can specify that in here and then choose what the schedule is going to look like. So if we want a monthly snapshot of this report, we can have one. We can give it the day of the month that we want it to run and hit schedule, and it will create that scheduled report for me. So let's just jump back to some that have been created. So in here, we can see that a Discover Permissions was scheduled on the site collection. And that's currently pending. This one here actually completed, and we've got a link to it. So I can open up that link, and we can go through and see the permission report. So we get that in Excel. We can see again the scope, whether it's unique permissions or not, a list of users that are permissioned, and what permissions they have, etc., and how they were permissioned. So all of that is there for us to work with as a snapshot. Okay, so that's some of the permission reports that we can run centrally by choosing the different scopes on the tree view. There are some permission reports that are unique to things like site collections. So we've got things like the dead account report. What I'm going to do is actually just collapse that site collection, and we'll just cherry pick a few site collections in here, and notice that when I run the dead account report, that it's running in the scope of those site collections that I selected. So when we generate it, we then get to see any dead accounts. So dead account is a user that is either disabled or deleted from the Active Directory, yet still permissioned to objects inside those site collections. So we can see demo user 26, for example, is in here as a disabled account. I could choose that account and remove it. And the one above here is demo user 25, which is a deleted account. So we wouldn't find them inside the Active Directory anywhere. And of course, we could go through and remove them as well if we wanted to. Okay, so that's dead account reporting. We also have some similar reports to that, such as unlicensed users and external users as well. And we also have a unique permission report, which is something that we could also run at site collection level. So we could, again, choose certain site collections, run a unique permission report, and specify the user that we want to run it on. and generate, and this will give us what we need to know about that particular user across those site collections. So not a lot apparently. Let's just run that here from the accounts view. Oh yeah, because of course I just deleted a bunch of those. I reversed it, so let's do demo user 4 instead. So demo user 4, let's run a unique permissions report on demo user 4. It's a bit more like it. So on this current scope, which is just a single site collection, I can first of all see what groups demo user 4 is a member of. So this is all the SharePoint groups, the Microsoft 365 groups, and the AD security groups. We can see how they are a member, so whether it's direct or indirect. And then we've also got site permissions, list permissions, and item permissions that user's been granted. So from there, we could also make changes. If there's anything that we don't like the look of, we can simply go through, select, and run the actions against it, such as a delete permissions or transfer those to a different user. Okay, so that's the unique permissions report. Also available from this view of accounts view, when we search on a user, we could also produce some OneDrive reports as well. So you'd need to grant permissions to yourself to run the OneDrive permission report. But let's say this particular user was leaving the organization, they may have shared certain files and folders with other people inside the organization that those people rely on to do their jobs. So we don't just want to disable the disable the OneDrive account. We want to first of all check what permissions or what sharing links exist on that OneDrive account. So we can produce a permission report. We can see the permissions that were granted inside that OneDrive account, and also any sharing links that have been granted as well. And again, we could go through and remove those sharing links if need be from there. Okay. So that's some of the different reports. We've also got things like discovering usage, which is useful, so we can see what files and folders are being used. And we also have a my own site collections, which if I don't select a user and we run a my own site collections, I'm going to see all of the site collections where I am the owner of those. We can determine the type of site collection that it is, whether it's a team or a classic site collection, etc. And from here we can go through and manage those, including a transfer ownership. So if somebody is a site collection admin, they're leaving, we can transfer that ownership to another user. If I search on a user first, again, such as Sandy, and we rerun the my own site collections, I get to see that. I get to see the site collections that Sandy is the owner of, and so on as well. Okay, so that's just some of the useful reports that we've got here in DeliverPoint, and we can get into a lot more depth with it, but obviously time isn't on our side in a webinar. So in terms of Microsoft Teams, we have the same product. It's the exact same product working inside of the Microsoft Teams environment. The advantage here is that you're in context with Teams whilst you're managing Teams, and the same problems are really being addressed. So when we are inside the Teams environment, which we will be in just a moment, let's just close this down and we'll open up Teams in a new tab here. I'm just going to use the web app view. So in this environment here, in order to be able to check the permissions on each team, let alone private channels and so on, we have to go through the manage team. And once we've gone into the manage team, we'll be able to see the owners and any members and so on. So again, you can't do that on multiple teams at the same time. Whereas if we open up DeliverPoint with inside the Teams environment, this is going to enumerate all of our teams. And now we can go through and select those teams and we can report on them. So we've got the same functionality. I could do a search on, sorry, in the accounts view, we could do a search on a user. And we could run the unique permissions report again and so on from within inside this this particular view here. Okay, so you get that best of both worlds, being able to manage permissions from both of those environments. Okay, so let's jump into the new features of DeliverPoint. So these are the ones that we're about to release. So we've got the inclusion now of sensitivity labels. So if you're using the sensitivity labels inside your organization against sites and files and folders, you can now start to report on those using DeliverPoint. So we'll be getting into that in just a moment. We've got that directly inside the Discover Permissions report. We can also use it as part of the permission summary, so we can see what the most used sensitivity labels are inside of our sites. And some other improvements that we've made include the Active Directory disabled accounts. So they now show up in the contextual Discover Permissions report as a faded account. So we'll be taking a look at that one. And then we've also got some sharing link improvements. So we can, as you just saw, we can now change the settings on the sharing links, not just delete the sharing links. And we've got the icons showing up, which again, you may have picked up on as we went through this demo. So let's just take a look at some of these new features, and then we'll open up for a Q&A. So in here, we've got, again, the same site open. And what I'm going to do is just pull up the main DeliverPoint page, and we're going to produce a Discover Permissions Advanced report. And what you'll notice in here is when I specify that I want to include lists and libraries and I want to include folders and items, that we also, and sharing links as well, we also get this show sensitivity labels for files. So I'm going to check that option and let's hit generate. So we've got all of our site permissions, which we'll just collapse here. And then we've got list permissions, which I'm also going to go through and collapse. And then we're into the folder and file permissions. Now, some of these objects don't have a sensitivity label set. So what I'm going to do is just hit the drop down to filter on that. And notice that we can filter on the sensitivity label, so we can go through and choose what we want to filter on. So in here, we've got confidential, sensitive, or blank. So I'm going to pull up everything that is marked as confidential. So reassuringly for data protection officers and also business users, if anything has been marked as sensitive, highly confidential, top secret, whatever, we can then go through and determine whether the right people have access to that content. Now, when I produced this report, I actually produced this just focusing on objects with unique permissions. So what I'm also going to do is include those that are inheriting as well. Let's just tick everything. There we go. So, so this is pretty much going to show me everything inside the site. Let's just minimize the site and lists. So we're getting that dimmed file name if it's inheriting. And what you'll notice in here is yeah, we've got a few more sensitivity labels showing up. So there's a highly confidential as well. So we can select that and have the peace of mind that this is inheriting permissions. So the permission inheritance hasn't been broken in any way. What we will pick up on is another new feature. Notice demo user 26 here. We already determined that demo user 26 was a dead account. We can see that that dead account has permissions to the sales plan. So that's something that we could go through and select and remove the permissions for that particular account and so on. So that's also another improvement to DeliverPoint. So that's the sensitivity labels showing up inside the reports. What we'll also do is take a look at the permission summary. So when I run the permission summary, there's an option here to also show the top used sensitivity labels. So we'll select that, generate the report. And as we scroll down, you can see that there's objects with confidential, sensitive, and highly confidential labels. So if I want to determine what those objects are, we can drill into those. So this is returned the objects and the people that are permissioned on them. So again, we can see that that's got unique permissions. So an action that we might take is to select that and inherit permissions on that particular object. Okay, so these are the sort of changes that we can make based on that sensitivity label showing up there. Okay, so yeah, sensitivity labels are included in a couple of places there. So another new feature, let's just close this, is the ability to modify the sharing link settings. So what we had prior to 4.2 release was this exact same report. We could produce the sharing link report, and we could see, for example, with this one, lorem ipsum, that there's certain users that have access to that sharing link. Now, when you do share a file or a folder, this SharePoint group here gets provisioned, which is basically containing the type of sharing link inside the name of it, along with a unique GUID, and then it puts the users inside that group in order to be able to give them that contribute permissions to that file. Now, what we had to do before, if we decided that these people should not have the sharing link, is remove the sharing link and then share it again if I only wanted, say, demo user 6 to have access to it. What we can do now is change settings, and that will pull up the setting for this one. So if I wanted to remove demo user 6, I could do, and we could save that and leave it as just Brett Lonsdale having access. We don't have to delete that sharing link at all. So, so that's a major improvement. And of course, we could add people as well. So I could select that, maybe add in here demo user 4, since they've taken over the role that demo user 6 had. So we could save that one. We may decide that we want to change that level of permission. If we change from from edit to read, we could also block the download. So we can stop them from downloading the file, and then of course being able to edit it. And we can also open this up for anyone as well, if that's allowed inside the organization. So these are the types of settings that we can make by pulling up the setting option for that sharing link in that regard. If I take the anyone link that I've got here, when we've got that selected, notice that this changes to change expiration. There's no other real settings to change on it other than the expiry date. So, so that's something that we could go through and either give more time or take away time based on any one link. And the same sort of thing with passwords. If we wanted to set a password on a file, you could also do that through here. If something's already got a password, you can't remove that password. Using DeliverPoint, that password is still going to stick. Okay, so that's some of the sharing link improvements that we have here. And we've got the same sort of option now for OneDrive as well. So again, if we were to use Sandy again, we can select Sandy's account. I can have a look at the sharing links that's been shared from her OneDrive account. We can see there's an anonymous sharing link in here, so we could go through and set an expiry date for that, which we couldn't do before, and so on. We can also remove the sharing links from there too. Okay, so some good improvements to sharing links. So we've seen the sensitivity labels, we've seen the sharing link improvements. The other improvement here is the document icons. So a fairly subtle one. And you may think, well, why on earth did you not have that anyway? But yeah, if we go through to discover the permissions, let's include files, otherwise you're not going to see it. So we'll go through, do a discover permissions advanced. Generate this one. So now it's much easier to determine a folder against files and so on as well. So we can see the type of file that each of these are. Okay, so these are the improvements in version 4.2. So I'm just going to pull up some frequently asked questions. So this is usually about the architecture of DeliverPoint and some concerns that people might have of obviously installing a third-party tool. So one of the questions that we quite often get asked is, how is DeliverPoint installed? So the nice thing about DeliverPoint is it's actually just simply a SharePoint framework application that you drag and drop into your SharePoint app catalog. With all SPFX applications, once they're in there, there's usually some API permissions that you need to grant. There is also with DeliverPoint, in order for it to be able to read Active Directory group memberships and so on, you need to give it the privilege to be able to do that. So that would be one of the API permissions that you're inserting. If you're already using DeliverPoint and you're upgrading to 4.2 next week, there is another API permission that you'll need to grant, and that will give it the ability to see the security labels. So there is one around compliance that you also need to enable to give it that ability to read any labels. So where's the data stored is quite a common question. There is actually no data storage. So DeliverPoint installs inside your tenant, and through that logic, it's just producing reports based on what you tell it to report on, and it's live reports. Basically, the only time anything gets stored is if you were to run a scheduled job and you're then specifying a document library inside of your tenant again that's protected by the permissions that you have in place for that file to be created. There's no other storage at all that takes place there. Who can run the permission reports is often a good question as well. So you see me accessing DeliverPoint from files and folders inside of document libraries and against the site and so on. That will only show up if the current user has full control. So if you have edit permissions, you won't see the DeliverPoint menu items flagging up at all. So that's just dynamic. You're either going to see it or not based on the security trimming that takes place. And then licensing for DeliverPoint is based on the number of SharePoint licensed users inside of your environment. So if you've got maybe 2,000 employees and 1,500 of those are licensed to use SharePoint, would be basing the license off of those 1,500 users for your tenant. Okay, so that's hopefully some of the frequently asked questions. There's a couple of questions that I see already inside the chat window. Just going to check the Q&A panel. There's no questions in there, so I'm just going to go off the chat window. So one of the questions is it possible to schedule a job to remove sharing links, let's say every 30 days? Unfortunately, there is not. So we can report on the sharing links, but we don't have an option to remove those sharing links that would be automated. That might be something for maybe to consider with Power Automate or something, I would guess, to create that as a schedule. But yeah, hopefully you've seen how we can make it easy to remove sharing links. So if you were a site owner with that responsibility, you could produce a sharing links report. You can do a select all and then remove, and that would be fairly intuitive. And of course, you could schedule the sharing links reports. That's going to highlight to you the fact that there are some sharing links as well. Another question is there a report that shows sites that I have access to? Yeah, so you could use that user-centric report. That's going to show you what you've been granted permissions to. But what you can also do is run a discover permissions report as well. So if we wanted to run this against certain sites, for example, I'm just going to choose a number of different site collections in here, so we get that produced relatively quickly. What I can do is jump here into the discover permissions, either at site level or at the more detailed level, and then of course we could filter on ourselves. So in here I could set the user display name to Brett Lonsdale, hit save, and now I'm seeing everything that I've got permissions to with inside one report. So that's the discover permissions. And then you've also got that unique permission report as well. Okay, so another question here is just to confirm if my site collection has circa 300 users, but my company's tenant has 15,000 users, the licensing would be based on the 15,000. Yeah, so DeliverPoint is a tool that is installed against the tenant. Like I said, it's going to show up and be accessible to any user with full control. We can limit it to certain site collections, so you could do that trickery inside the app catalog if you wanted to get into that, and that way you could limit it to just work inside certain site collections. But yeah, the default licensing is based on the number of users inside the tenant that have a SharePoint license against them. Okay, and it looks like there's a useful link here to how you could remove sharing links with a Microsoft Learn document. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Okay, and there's a use case in here as well. So we set up new folders for each new project that we initiate. Several of the folders have unique permissions, so broken permission inheritance. You remove the groups left behind have access. We have to do this manually for each folder. Could this be handled by DeliverPoint? Yeah, so the benefit there is you can manage the permissions across multiple folders in one go. So absolutely, you don't have to go in and visit each individual folder. I could select certain folders. I could do a select all folders, or from the main DeliverPoint page, we could focus just on those folders that have broken permission inheritance as well. And from there, we could get into the ability to remove permissions and so on. So yeah, here if we discover permissions, we may then start to make changes from within inside that permission report. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I see. So just jumping back to the slide for a moment as well. If you think of some questions, feel free to reach out to our help desk. So you can email help@lightningtools.com, or you can visit our website and fill out the form there as well to get access to our help desk. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more, obviously we have a lot of features to show in a short webinar. So hopefully this has given you a heads up of the main features. But if you want to get into a private demonstration, you can schedule that on our website, so you can book a demo with me. I'd be happy to take you through some specific scenarios for your organization. Or if you want to skip all of that and just download a 30-day trial, you can do so also from our website under DeliverPoint as well. All right, so we will be announcing when the release is available, so look out for that next week. We'll be pushing that out onto our website, and you'll be able to download and upgrade to it if you are currently on 4.1 or an earlier version. All right, I hope you found that useful. Thank you everybody for attending, and hopefully see you on our next webinar, which will be next month, and that's not going to be on our product. It's actually going to be on building solutions with SharePoint out of the box. So we're having a break from our product. So if you want to have a look at that, you can do. I see there was one question that just jumped in regarding CDNs. Thank you very much. So a couple of comments in here as well saying thank you. So thank you too. I appreciate that. But yeah, question about the CDN. So I'm assuming that CDN and dedicated installs both are available for download. Yes, correct. So so if you are running in a dedicated environment, you'll be able to install that without using the CDN for that environment. All right, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate, as always, everybody attending. Take care. Thank you.